Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is March 25th, 2024, Monday, March 25th, 2024. And for our first story, let's look at what they call UFOs. All right. And the reason why I say this is that if you've been keeping up with regular news, as you well know, there's conjecture about the eclipses that are coming up, even though the major solar one won't be till April the 8th. Okay, but like everything that's up in the skies, things like this always become more interesting. Now, this one, hunting UFOs and the paranormal. What does an Oregonian man with failing health, a report of a gray creature with spindly legs, and a werewolf like animal have in common? The answer is that they were all investigated by a secret Pentagon program. The basis for the Defense Intelligence Agency's investigation is trailing a connection between UFOs and the paranormal. The Pentagon has rebranded the phenomena of unidentified flying objects to unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP. Involving the paranormal with UFOs is an unusual turn of events, especially after decades of disavowing, in the strongest terms, the existence of extraterrestrials by the government. Others believe the cover up is the government's attempt to hide advanced technological inventions which have nothing to do with extraterrestrials. There is a leaked video dating back to 2004, but released in 2017, where Navy fighter pilots on the USS Nimitz spy a flying tic tac shaped object that zips away at blazing speeds off the coast of California. The object was also seen on radar. The pilots had been scrambled to encounter an oblong white object that flew without any visible propulsion system or wings. The report summarized the sightings this way, quote, an initial report on the military UFO situation ordered by Congress and released in June 2021 by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence provided some context and left many questions unanswered. The investigation was largely inconclusive, with 144 cases of objects reported since 2004 that couldn't be identified, and 18 that seemed to include unusual flight, such as moving against the wind or at high speeds without visible means of propulsion. End quote. The program also explored the ability of remote viewers to spy on people in places thousands of miles away. An earlier program that explored this ability and was allegedly closed down in 1995 is believed by many to have kept on operating after this time. Colm Keller, a contractor, worked with James Lukowski, a now retired DIA intelligence officer, who set up the UFO program that ran from 2008 to 2010. Keller would go on to work with Robert Bigelow, a wealthy aerospace company owner with an interest in the afterlife and UFOs. The nexus for these interests stemmed from a UFO encounter Bigelow's maternal grandparents, Tom and Delta Thiebaud, had in 1947. From an early age, Bigelow also had to deal with unexpected death to those around him. When he was 18, his father was killed in a private airplane crash. In 1992, his 24-year-old son, Rod Lee, died by suicide, and Rod's son also killed himself with a drug overdose in 2011 at the age of 20. In 2020, Bigelow's wife, Diane, age 72, died from cancer. In 1995, Bigelow established the National Institute of Discovery Science and bought the 480-acre Skinwalker Ranch in the Utah Basin in Utah from the previous owners, Terry and Gwen Sherman. The Shermans experienced a slew of inexplicable sightings of UFOs and paranormal creatures. The ranch's name dates back to stories told by the Ute and Navajo tribes, who believed witches known as skinwalkers would traverse through the land. Bigelow placed Colm Keller at the head of the investigative team he established to find the source of the anomalies cited throughout the years. Keller would go on to co-write a book with Lukowski titled Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and with Las Vegas reporter George Knapp, The Hunt for the Skinwalker. Eventually, a sailor and two Marines who were involved in the Nimitz investigation were sent to Skinwalker Ranch. They supposedly saw a black void on the land that filled them with fear. After leaving the ranch, the three men experienced paranormal activity at their homes that ranged from orbs, strange noises to dark figures or shadow people seen at night in their bedrooms. The sailor's wife and two children who lived in Virginia claimed to have seen a werewolf like creature that walked on two legs staring at them through a window at their home. They had this experience twice. Members of Bigelow's team related their own strange experiences this way. Quote, on one occasion, they write, investigators peering through night vision goggles watched an expanding tunnel of light disgorge a large hominid creature that then walked away and disappeared. A sudden fissure in the sky seemed to open a vista onto another dimension. Cattle were found crammed into a closed trailer with no sign of how they got there, and a closed-circuit video camera trained on the grounds had its wiring torn out, while another camera focused on it recorded nothing. Mr. Bigelow said he saw interdimensional forces at play through portals at certain paranormal hotspots like Skinwalker, but he also said he had frequently visited the ranch without experiencing the kind of chilling events others reported, as if some intelligence were selecting the people to act upon. Excuse me. I slept like a log every single night, he said, and no human was physically harmed, but he said he and other visitors often carried strange things home, like a sulfurous stink in a certain part of his house. His wife felt the presence of a faceless creature pressing down on her side of the bed. End quote. The Utah Basin is the site of a massive sea of oil. Between 1996 to 2014, 13,847 drilling permits were issued. 92% of those were in Utah, Duquesne, and Carbon counties. Skinwalker Ranch is at the epicenter of all this activity. Things died down in 2015 when Bigelow sold the ranch to real estate mogul Brandon Fugel. Fugel claims to have closed on his first deal as a teenager when he was a brand new missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Under his ownership, The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch, a docuseries from the History Channel, has been filmed on site. In 2020, Fortean researcher Lon Strickler received the following story from two young Mormon missionaries assigned to the Navajo reservation. Quote, I finally turned 19, the big age for Mormons, where I get to leave for 2 years of my life and share my gospel as an LDS missionary. I get my calling, where and when you'll serve, open it up and see that I've been called to serve in the Farmington, New Mexico mission. My best buddy, who happens to be Navajo, gets super excited for me because my area covers all of the reservation. I get stoked as well and get ready to leave in a few months. Within that time period, my buddy gives me some heads up about what I'll witness on the reservation, and one, of course, has to be skinwalkers. The white men, for good reason, albeit, still aren't that liked on the reservation, so he warned me to be humble and kind, and to try not warrant any bad juju in my direction, so I agreed and left for 2 years. The first month was pretty uneventful. I prepared in Utah, then flew out to Farmington, where I met my mission president and where my first area would be. I got assigned to the town of Tohatchi, a tiny dot of a place on the reservation. We lived in a trailer behind the local church because there weren't really any houses for rent out in the middle of the reservation. Here is where things get weird on my first week. Seriously, my first week I'm there, this happens to me. Missionaries have a strict scheduling during the day. We pray, eat, go teach, and come home to do a few push-ups and in bed by 9. So me and my companion, I won't share his name because I'm not sure if he'd enjoy being mentioned, we start to do our little workout when all of a sudden we hear some footsteps outside. Creeped us out a little bit, but sadly the reservation has a lot of drunk residents that'll stumble around until they're eventually picked up by cops or family members. We brush it off and keep on with our routine. That is until the steps are right outside our door. Now, mind you, I'm 6 foot, semi-athletic, 160 pounds, so I'm definitely not going to try and pick a fight with anyone. But my companion was 6'5", 280-pound Tongan. Let's just say I felt a bit safe. Then the person started pounding on our door. I looked over to my friend and he looked a little worried, more cautious than anything. Like I said, non-natives aren't very popular on the reservation, and it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for someone to try and rob or frighten us. Kind of get the hell out of here message. Here's the freaky part. The pounding of fists turned into scratching almost instantaneously. Our first thoughts were, oh shit, he has a dog. We came to the conclusion to grab our weights and just try to sleep through the crap. Well, nothing else eventful happened that night. It was rough falling asleep, but once I did, everything seemed fine. We walked outside to see if we could Sherlock Holmes together some evidence to see if we knew who it was or any beer cans to verify our suspicions. What we found was terrifying and shocking to say the least. We were right, boot prints leading to our door, but where we should find boot prints leading away were paw prints. I remember them like it was yesterday. A bit bigger than a dog, I figured they were a coyote or wolves. We couldn't understand what we were seeing. Why weren't there boot prints leading away, or these paw prints leading to? We didn't say it out loud, but I think we came to the same conclusion. Whatever knocked on our door changed shape right then and there. The day went on uneventful. We told our bishop, and he knocked it off to just a drunkard bugging us. He said to pray and to stay safe by being indoors before dark. Nothing crazy happened until that night, where I had one of the worst nightmares or night terrors of my life. I had my back to our door. When I woke in my dream, I didn't even have to turn around to feel the unholy energy that was gravitating from whatever was inside our trailer. I had no voice. I silently pleaded in the name of Jesus Christ, but nothing helped. It stepped on the corner of my bed, and it felt as if my entire mattress was lifted. Whatever it was, my best way describing it is like a dementor from Harry Potter. It then drove me into my bed, ripping the breath from my lungs. I started crying, praying to my God to protect me from this thing. Then in a second, wham! I'm awake in a cold sweat, crying and waking my companion up. This happened to me the next week, every night without fail. Long story short, I ended up going home early. It was mentally taxing reliving that every night, and they instantly went away when I got home. If anyone had ever had an experience with skinwalkers and the curses that they can hex people with, I'm sure that you understand what I'm talking about. Maybe that's what I was experiencing, but it scares me half to death and was the two most dreadful months of my life. So there you go. And it's really funny because recently I was watching the last season of Skinwalker Ranch that was released, which is season 4, and they're doing all these experiments, and there is that, how can I say, that emphasis or that possible explanation that there is some type of portal in that area. So it's, let's see what happens. That's very unusual. But again, the it seems again like the that there's a mixture, there's an overlayering of paranormal events and UFO sightings. Very unusual. Next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories and is titled The White Thing of West Virginia. Imagine, if you will, a creature found in the island of Dr. Moreau, one known as the Sayer of the Law. However, instead of a lonely island, it is found in Appalachia, known as the White Thing. It's also known as sheep squatch by West Virginians, and is described as a large bipedal creature reminiscent of Bigfoot or a four-legged animal, larger than a dog with sharp saber-like teeth. It's white with ram's horns, and most alarmingly, known as being aggressive, smelling like sulfur and possibly carnivorous. The reported sightings are found in a mountain range known as Morgan's Ridge in the counties of Boone, Kanawha, Putnam, and Mason. The size of the animal can vary, but what is common is that it has white, shaggy fur, a long, hairless tail, paw-like hands, and has a unique and chilling scream. One sighting dates back to 1929, which occurred to an immigrant by the name of Frank Kazul. He, like many others, came to America seeking a better life. He left Dalmatia, Croatia in 1914, fleeing impending war at his homeland, and came to West Virginia, drawn by offer of work as a coal miner. By 1920, the 30-year-old lived at a boarding house in Marshall County, West Virginia, with other Croatians. He eventually married and went to work at the Consolidated Coal Company's Jordan 93. On a summer evening in 1929, he was walking home from his shift and decided to take a shortcut through Morgan's Ridge, which is present-day US 19. This is what he experienced as retold by his daughter Beatrice. Quote, he encountered a beast about the size of a large dog with white hair, a bushy tail, and sharp teeth. Before he could react, the animal pounced on him, and though he swung at it with his lunchbox, he couldn't make contact. Kazul attempted to escape the creature by running away, but it continued to attack. As he reached the outskirts of a nearby cemetery, however, the attack ceased and the animal disappeared. Looking himself over, Kazul was astonished to discover he had no injuries from the attack. In fact, had no marks of the incident whatsoever. He rushed home to a sleepless night and never took the same shortcut home from the mine again. End quote. Are these stories folklore, urban myth, or actual events? Kurt McCoy, in his book White Thing, mentions that the mountains, hollers, and backwoods of West Virginia are secluded areas where occult practices have taken place. Think of the setting and storyline of the film Pumpkinhead that was released in 1988. These are other first-hand stories about contact with sheep squatch. Quote, in 1994, a former Navy seaman witnessed the beast break through the forest. The white thing drank for a few minutes, then crossed the creek and continued on across toward the road. The Navy seaman observed the animal for a while and then it moved on into the surrounding bush. Also, in that same year, two children observed the beast while playing in the yard in Boone County. They saw what looked like a large white bear, and it stood up on its hind legs, which made it over 6 feet tall. Startled, the beast ran away through the forest, breaking medium-sized limbs off of trees as it went. Another encounter a year later involved a car. A couple driving through Boone County noticed a large white beast sitting in the ditch along the road. They stopped their car to get a good look at it. It was described again as a large white animal with woolly fur about the size of a bear. In this instance, it was described as having 4 eyes. Then it jumped out of the ditch and started attacking the car. The couple drove off quickly, and when they got home, noticed the large scratches on the side where the beast attacked. Another incident occurred in 1999. This time, a couple of campers were in the forest of Boone County at night around a campfire. They heard an animal snorting and scuffling around the camp, but it did not come into the light of the campfire. All of a sudden, the sheep squatch appeared out of the darkness and charged at the campers. They jumped up and ran back to their house, all the while being pursued by the sheep squatch. It stopped at the edge of the forest, however, and let out a terrible scream. Then it just turned around and headed back into the woods. The next morning, the campers examined their campsite and the trail home. It was torn up, they said, like someone had tilled it up for gardening. End quote. In 2011, Lon Strickler from Phantoms and Monsters received the following story. Quote, Mr. Strickler, I hope you can give me an idea of what I saw a few weeks ago while hiking with a friend in Fairy Stone State Park in Virginia. We had been on one of the trails for about an hour when we stopped for a brief rest and drink. This was my first visit to this park, and I was pleased that the area we were in was secluded. After a few minutes of rest, we continued to walk along the trail when my friend suddenly stopped and pointed towards the right at a large group of rocks. Something was moving about, but it was about 50 yards away, so we didn't get a very good look. We could see that it was light in color and was quite bulky. We stood frozen, wanting to know what this creature was, though I was getting more frightened by the second. As we started to walk, the creature moved into a rock where we got a good look at it. It looked like a medium-sized bear, but the fur was very light in color, almost a yellowish gray. The head was very strange also. There was a snout like that of a bear, but the dark round eyes were set lower on the head. It was looking in our direction, and we had no intention on sticking around to see what it was going to do. We got back to the car and immediately left for home. I have read online that this area has a strange history, thus the name Fairy Stone. The creature is unlike any I have seen or heard about before. I'd made an inquiry to a local historian who laughed at me and said I saw a sheep squatch. What is that? Thank you for your help, Tina. I wonder what Lon responded. In 2000, that was end quote. In 2013, Monsters and Mysteries in America, Season 1, Episode 1, released an episode titled Appalachia. It recounted the encounters between some hunters and the white thing this way, quote, in July 2004, Dakota Cheeks and Ricky Joyce set off on a hunting trip into a remote area of Breckinridge County, Kentucky. Ricky's grandparents' cabin was at the foot of 100 acres of dense timber. It would be their base camp. On the first morning, one of Ricky's dogs would not come when called. They found her deceased in a ditch, her head twisted all around. There's no animal up here that can grab an animal by its chin and the back of its head and twist it, you know. No coyote can do it. There's no bears as far as I know up here, Dakota noted. They had been hearing noises, growls and screams coming from the top of the mountain, and using their four-wheelers they went out to the hilltop to look for what might have killed the dog. We decided we were going to hop on the four wheelers and stake out the hilltop. We ended up going to the far side of the property where nobody really goes. There are no trails. We made a couple of laps around the field. That way we can both easily see where the four wheeler had been so we know where to look. Cheeks recalled they spent a good portion of the day looking for whatever it could be but found nothing. Eventually, they retreated back to the camper. Right away, they began hearing strange noises, like something was walking around. At around 5 a.m., the dogs started barking. They ran off. Soon again, something began slamming into the trailer. It literally sounded like all hell was breaking loose. It almost like you can hear something pressing up against the side, and you can kind of hear the tent start to bend. Just that weird, eerie metal sound, Dakota said. Suddenly, whatever it was stopped and walked away. Eventually, they armed themselves and headed out on their four wheelers to look for the creature that rocked their trailer. They looked most of the day into the evening. Just after dusk, they had crossed through a cemetery and just entered an open field when they saw something. Ricky spotted it first. I'd seen something standing in the field, and at first I thought it was a tree. It was tall, but it was also kind of hunched over a little bit. It was big, it was white, its arms were long, but they were kind of like this, and that they had these long talons. It was too big to be a person. When it was on two legs, it stood at least 9 feet tall. I mean, it was massive. When it noticed us, it let out the most ungodly, gut curling growl. It came straight at us, Dakota said, adding, "We saw sheep squatch. That's what we saw." They shot at it while rushing back to Ricky's grandparents' cabin. They weren't certain they actually hit the creature, but they never saw it again that evening. I've been in some pretty scary situations, but most situations you know what you're dealing with. On that one, I didn't, so I didn't know how to react. That's quite possibly the scariest moment in my life, Ricky recalled. It made me believe the unbelievable. I didn't believe in myths. I didn't believe in wives' tales. None of that until I saw that. And after that changed my life forever. I mean, there are things out there and we don't know what they are. End quote. Another story of a close encounter with a chief squash dates back to 2004. Quote, "As I walked the creek, I heard something large break through the brush ahead of me and I froze. Logic told me that it was at worst a large dog or even a stray cow, as it is very little in the way of predators in Mason County. Still, I've been a hunter since my teenage years and I knew well that the West Virginia DNR had been actively repopulating absent native species. It was wholly possible that I was about to become come face to face with something which might consider me lunch. What I saw emerge from the brush was a large brownish white creature. Its fur looked dirty and matted, as if the animal did very little in the line of self grooming. I can't be sure if I was looking at a dirty white animal or a brownish animal with a white undercoat. It was late in the fall, so it makes sense that it might be putting on a winter coat. The creature moved on all fours as it reached the brush line and knelt to drink from the creek. Its front limbs, the only limbs I saw clearly, ended in what was markedly paw-like hands. Its head was long and pointed like a canine, and had largish horns, not antlers, but single-point horns. I shrunk back into the brush and watched, afraid to stay and afraid to run. It drank for a few minutes, then crossed the creek and continued on across towards Sand Hill Road. When I was sure it was gone, I turned and ran as fast as I could back toward the pond where I'd parked. The one thing that sticks out in my mind about this encounter most clearly is the way it smelled. It smelled like sulfur. Now, don't think I'm screaming fire and brimstone here. I'm not. One of the biggest problems with the TNT area is the pollution from the manufacturing activities that went on there. The worst of this is the red water runoff generated by the production of gunpowder. The area was a Navy ammunition plant at one time and made gunpowder. Red water, the cause to this date of the brownish red foam seen in many of the runoff ponds, has a sulfur content that should concern anyone exposed to it. Makes sense that anything living in this area should absorb some measure of that scent if they are drinking from these water sources. So there you go. This is very interesting. This is, outside the, as far as different types of cryptids, and in particular, this one seems to like that area, those counties in West Virginia. So I'm sure not everybody's heard of this cryptid. I had until I came across that story. All right. Next story is out of Unilad, and is titled Mars Declared Unsafe for Humans to Live as No One Can Survive for Longer Than 4 years. All right. Astronomers have high hopes to get humans to Mars, but since the planet has been declared unsafe for us to live on, we'll have to settle for a quick visit. After successfully landing robots on the red planet, NASA is now continuing its plans to send humans up to join them. The space agency has explained that Mars is one of the only other places we know where life may have existed in the solar system, so exploring it could help offer insights to the past and future of our own planet. NASA has suggested that the technology to take humans to Mars could be available as early as the 2030s, but don't start dreaming about life in outer space just yet. Last year, researchers combined studies from the likes of UCLA, MIT, Moscow's Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology, and GFZ Potsdam to look into the potential impact of life on Mars. Researchers sought to answer two questions. One focused on the impact of particle radiation and whether it would pose too grave a threat to human life, and the second about whether the timing of a mission to Mars could protect astronauts and the spacecraft from radiation. To find the answers they were looking for, the scientists used geophysical models of particle radiation for a solar cycle and models of how radiation could affect both human passengers and a spacecraft. Following the study, which was published in the Advancing Earth and Science journal, the researchers found that it would not be possible for humans to stay on Mars long term. They found that human exposure to radiation threats, including particle radiation from the sun, distant stars, and galaxies, would exceed safe levels after 4 years on the planet. The scientists did determine that the spacecraft used to travel to Mars should provide enough protection trip to and from the planet. But if the material used to build the spacecraft is too thick, then it could actually increase the amount of secondary radiation. Researchers also claim the best time to leave Earth would be when the solar activity is at its peak and the most dangerous particles are deflected, thus shielding the astronauts from the worst of it. The researchers explained, we estimate that a potential mission to Mars should not exceed approximately 4 years. This study shows that space radiation imposes strict limitations and present technological difficulties for the human mission to Mars. Such a mission is still viable. So, there's still every possibility that humans could reach Mars in a matter of years. We won't be able to rely on the planet as a new home, as if we needed another reason to take better care of the one we have. Okay, now what's really interesting is, this is usually we think of getting to, let's say, well, other planets, but in this case, Mars. We always think of the rocket, of the transportation part, you know, and there's something there just besides the rocket, getting the rocket to go there. It's radiation, that there's other obstacles out, besides, all the studies that they've done about, effects of gravity or non-gravity on the body and blah, 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 blah. It's what would happen for things of this nature. So yeah, I guess it's going to be a while before we, but I know that there's going to be groups out there of people that are going to, it's 4 years. That's a long time. I could go. I'm willing to go, but I don't know. Hey, they want to be the guinea pigs. Be my guest. Anyway, on to the next story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories. This is titled Death of the Divine Healer. His name was Francis or Francois Schlatter. And in 1894, he was a shoe cobbler in Denver, earning a precarious living. In the next 3 years, his life took a dramatic turn. He became a renowned healer, a hermit, and ended up dying alone. This is June 1897. Two American prospectors were in the foothills of the Sierra Madre on the Puertas Verdes River when they came across a saddle on a limb in a dead tree high up in a gorge the river ran through. A bleached skeleton was lying stretched out on a blanket close to the tree, and next to it was a copper rod. Piled on the tree were saddlebags, a book, a package of letters bound by a rubber band, 6 suits of underwear, and some blankets. There was also a canteen and a Bible with the name of Francis Slatter written inside the cover. Needles, thread, buttons, and other items were found in a knothole in the tree. There were no signs of violence on the skeleton, and the prospectors believed he died of self-imposed starvation, since there was no cooking utensils found amongst his belongings. The site was 35 miles southwest of Casa Grande in the state of Chihuahua. The mayor was notified and the remains were taken to the village. Americans in Casa Grande examined the letters and belongings and confirmed they belonged to Schlatter. A Mormon cowboy who was among the Americans stated that in November 1896, Schlatter rode into his camp 50 miles west of Casa Grande on a gray horse. He was unarmed and was carrying no provisions or cooking utensils. He refused to eat anything and said he was fasting. The cowboy mentioned that Schlatter seemed preoccupied. In the few hours he was staying in his camp, he cured his horse of a swelling on the back and forelegs by rubbing his hands over them. He confirmed that the saddle belonged to Schlatter. An Indian told authorities that some months ago he found the gray horse hobbled where the skeleton was found. Who was Francis Schlatter? He was born in 1856 in Alsace, France, which is present-day Germany. He came to the United States in 1884 after his parents died in 1881. He wandered to different cities working as a cobbler. In 1892, he was living in Denver, which is when he received a vision and started to hear silent voices, which commanded him to give away his tools and begin a pilgrimage towards the Pacific coast. His walking pilgrimage spanned 3,000 miles, and along the way he allegedly healed many people. It was during these times that he became known as the Divine Healer. He was arrested for vagrancy in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and he escaped in early 1894 and headed west. He crossed through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and into Southern California. He crossed the Mojave Desert, living only on flour and water. By July 1895, he was seen as a Christ-like healer in the villages south of Albuquerque. He treated hundreds of sick and suffering people. He returned to Denver, where he drew in crowds of tens of thousands, looking to be healed at his home in North Denver. He refused payment for any of his services, saying his powers came from Father God. He disappeared on the night of November 13th, 1895, leaving a note that said his mission was ended. Nothing more was heard from him until his bones were found in 1897. Later was learned that he spent 3 months in Datil, New Mexico, in a ranch belonging to Ada Morley. He dictated his life story to her. She published it as The Life of the Harp in the Hand of the Harper. Prior to his death, he was known to go on periodic fasts for days at a time. The mystery of El Sanador's grave. After Schlatter's death, and for the next 25 years, several men claimed to be Francis Schlatter. They made headlines around the country for their healings. In 1906, Edgar Lee Hewitt, an archaeologist, was conducting research near Chihuahua, Mexico. His Mexican guide pointed to an unmarked grave, and he said that 10 years before, he came across the body of a dead man following a blizzard. Based on the guide's description, Hewitt believed the dead man was Francis Schlatter, who he had met in 1895. He had also witnessed his healing sessions. The guide told him some of the man's belongings were kept by the foreman of Casas Grandes. There he found Schlatter's Bible, saddle, and copper rod. In 1922, Hewitt returned to Mexico and examined the copper rod once more, which eventually came into the possession of the New Mexico History Museum in the Palace of the Governors. Soon after the report of Schlatter's death, there were those who contested if this was the truth. Ada Morley said she doubted the story of the men that found him, since coyotes would never have left a body undisturbed. The only proof the bones belonged to Schlatter were the belongings found with it. One of the men that posed as Schlatter was Charles McLean, a Presbyterian minister who died penniless in Hastings, Nebraska in 1909. McLean's true identity was cleared up when a family album containing his picture from 1871 was found with his belongings. Inside it was inscribed with the name Dr. Charles McLean. August Schrader and Jacob Kuntz formed a healing team that operated from 1908 to 1917. They were arrested in 1916 for mail fraud and went to jail. Another imposter died in St. Louis in October 1922. A book that was published in 2016 posits that Schlatter staged his death in Mexico and returned to continue his ministry through the southern and eastern USA. The author's claim rests mostly on the discovery of a forgotten autobiography in the Library of Congress titled Modern Miracles of Healing, a true account of the life, works, and wanderings of Francis Schlatter, the healer attributed to Francis Schlatter the Alsatian and published in 1903. Let me tell you, I had never heard of this man. And apparently, for the time that it Was he healing? Were people fooled? Was he suffering from mental illness? If it was true that he actually fasted himself to death, basically out of starvation. I never heard of him till I came across this story, which was very, very interesting. I mean, and he just decided I'm gonna walk to the West Coast. What do you think about that? All right. The next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and this is titled Haunted and for Sale. When you see a horror movie about a cursed house, once the credits roll, you sigh with relief because you live in an ordinary house. Everything changes when it comes to actually buying one and then living in a home that's stigmatized either by murder, suicide, or an actual haunting. On occasion, the first to discover that a property might be problematic is the realtor. Dana Bull arrived with an inspector at a two-family property in Salem, Massachusetts. One of the units was occupied, and the buyer needed her feedback before deciding if they should stay or if new tenants were in order. The unit was filthy and full of satanic decor. Then she noticed something she missed on a prior visit. It was a door hidden behind a drape. Unlike the rest of the property, this room was clean and had objects she didn't recognize, but the inspector did know what they were. Bull said, "It was a room where we guessed they were sacrificing animals as part of a religious practice. Needless to say, my buyers didn't pursue that property." As a realtor handling sales in Salem, she came across properties owned by persons associated with the occult, but she relates that these are issues that realtors across the country face. Even though a haunted house has no material defect, it is still considered stigmatized. There's an emotional response when it comes known that a murder, suicide, drug manufacturing, devil worshipping, hoarding, or criminal activity have taken place inside a structure. Even though it's not logical, buyers are scared off from buying a property that otherwise they would be interested in. Most of the time, information of this type negatively impacts the market value of a house, no matter how attractive it is. In California, sellers are required to disclose to buyers if there's been a death in the house in the last 3 years. Some states have no laws requiring this or specify less time required for disclosure. Cindy Hagley sells property in California, but has served as a consultant on sales of houses perceived as being haunted throughout the country. She learned firsthand as a child that ghosts do exist. One night, a voice screamed, "You can't get in here right now." When she went to the bathroom, she found the tub filled 4 inches with individually lit matches. Her father questioned her and the siblings about who did it, even when it was obvious it would have taken days to light so many matches. He had a hard time believing his ordinary home in Rome, Ohio was actually haunted. The first stop for Cindy Hagley is a visit to the property which is allegedly haunted, just to make sure it actually is. If it is, she helps the sellers decide whether or not to tell the buyers. Her advice is to wait until they have a few offers before disclosing about the situation. A Colorado home had several deaths that occurred throughout the years. The family living there had seen shapes on the stairs, the piano playing by itself, and radios turning on without the help of a human agent. She feared there was a demonic aspect to the presence, and she stepped away from the case even though the property did sell. Some buyers just don't care if a house has a reputation of being haunted. In some cases, it's actually an enhancement if it's tied to a well-known story. A story like the one connected to a Victorian home overlooking Polly Judd Park in Spokane, Washington. After World War II, Thomas and Polly Judd took in soldiers coming back from the war. Their daughter lived in the home until the 1970s, and when she moved out, it became a rental. Inevitably, strange characters called it home, and then there were the troubled souls who decided to depart this world by their own hand within its walls. Bad fortune followed the homeowners like a faithful puppy. Marianne Bornhoft had her first experience with the house when she sold it. Once she had a photographer shoot the house for the real estate listing when she noticed the chandelier was casting shadows of three upside-down crosses on the wall. During an open house, a buyer told her something or someone shoved her when she was touring through the basement, where she had been trapped for hours. On another afternoon, the creepy chandelier started to swing by itself. Built in 1905, it had its weird history according to some neighbors, some verifiable, some not. Allegedly, it was built in a forgotten cemetery when graves that were supposed to be moved to Greenwood Cemetery weren't. During the 1920s, it doubled as a speakeasy during Prohibition, owing to its proximity to a railroad track, now defunct, where the booze was smuggled in, and then there are rumors of violent death. But let's go back to when Polly Judd lived there during the 1950s and 60s. After the war, Polly visited Japan and became so enamored with the emperor's gardener named Sakurai that she brought him to Spokane, where he oversaw a similar garden installed in Manito Park. Mr. Sakurai suffered a heart attack and he convalesced at the Judd home. He built her a personal Japanese garden as thanks for her care. Only remnants are left of the ponds and fountains. Present day, the neighbors call it the House of Broken Marriages, because starting in 1977 is when the real weirdness started to occur. The first renter was rumored to beat his girlfriend after getting high and drunk. The odds weren't in his favor, and he eventually died in the home from an overdose. Tenants came and went, more than what would be considered normal. One man was said to have hung himself on the second floor. It was bought in the 1980s by a young couple who spent $500,000 in renovations. The marriage went belly up, and so did their investment. In 1999, Kevin Cooley bought the house. His daughter Kara recalls that the door would open by themselves, including a trap door leading to the basement, which would slam shut unexpectedly. One night she saw her uncle pointing a rifle at a door in the basement that was bulging inward, but there was nothing on the other side. Mr. Cooley would hear something crash upstairs, but when he would check, there was nothing wrong. This would happen several times, leaving no doubt that this was not an old house settling. Perhaps the crashing noises were foreshadowing of what would happen to the Cooley marriage, which ended in divorce by the time they moved out in 2005. 2 years later, the new owners got a call from Mr. Cooley, who rambled and said, "You know, my life has gotten so much better since I got out of that house, Gavin. There was something bad about that house. My marriage was bad. Everything got dark since I moved to that house." These owners moved out around 2010, and the house went on the market until 2012, when a family from Montana moved in. The family's son Charlie said creepy things happened, especially in the basement where he slept. He described it this way: "Sometimes the door will just fly open all of a sudden, even if they're closed. And one time, I was sleeping in that room, and the door that's closest to the bed right there, my head was on the door, and the doorknob turned. So I just went upstairs and slept on the couch." Kelly, a realtor in Colorado, has home energy clearers, who she calls when a prime property just wouldn't sell for mysterious reasons. At first, she was skeptical, but after many years of using this method and it working, she just doesn't think it's goofy. She said she's learned to listen when other agents told her it just doesn't feel right about a particular property. One time she met with sellers and toured with them through their 19th century Victorian home. Everything was fine until they got to the basement. The family cat, which had followed the group through the house, refused to go down the stairs. When she reached the bottom, her skin prickled and she felt something was really wrong, even though the basement itself was unremarkable. She asked the owner about it, and they commented that no one wanted to go down there, animal or human. She decided it was time for a phone call to the clearers. The one she hired for the job later told her the basement had been the scene of a police raid during Prohibition. It seemed illegal alcohol was either being stored or produced. A shootout took place and someone got killed. After the clearer did her magic, the cat had no problem visiting the basement. Another time, she was contacted by clients she had sold the house to, who described they were seeing a white shrouded, kind of wispy sort of being. Everyone in the family had seen it. She offered to send a clearer, but the family said they liked the ghost and had even named it Lucy. There you go. You know, you never know which way that thing about the haunted house thing is going to go. Some people think thanks, but no thanks. And then other people are like, it's okay. It's all right. I don't have a problem with that. Sure. Why not? Right. The next story is titled, also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, is titled Life and Death at Lake Compounce. Lake Compounce is the oldest continuously operating amusement park in the United States. It's located in Bristol, Connecticut, and originally covered 332 acres that included a beach and water park. In 1684, the Mattock tribe signed a deed leaving the property to settlers of what was to become the Lake Compounce Park. In October 1846, Samuel Botsford, an influential scientist, had persuaded Gad Norton, descended from one of the original owners, to use the property to conduct experiments in electricity. When Gad Norton saw the crowds that gathered to see the experiment using explosives, he decided to open the park. He named it after Chief John Compound, who signed over the land so many years before. The public came to swim and row on the lake. A gazebo on the lakeside provided musical entertainment. Families would come to spend the day with a picnic basket in hand. In 1895, a casino was added with a restaurant downstairs and a ballroom upstairs. That same year, the Plainville Tramway Company constructed the Southington and Compounce trolley. On Memorial Day in 1911, they opened the Lake Compounce Carousel. This was followed by the Green Dragon roller coaster in 1914. This was the park's first electric-powered roller coaster. It was torn down in 1927 to be replaced by the Wildcat, a wooden coaster which is still in existence today. The Ghost Reveal. During the 1930s, the Starlight Ballroom was added to the casino. In 1941, Tommy Dorsey and Frank Sinatra appeared there and drew in a crowd of 5,000. The use of automobiles in the Great Depression impacted attendance, and the use of trolleys also declined. In 1944, the park opened a steam railroad. The success of Compounce Lake continued until the 1960s. In 1966, Edward Pierce sold his share to the Norton family, who operated until 1985, when it was sold to the Hershey Entertainment and Resorts Company. Marketing was not that good and attendance declined. This, coupled with repeated ride outages, brought about the sale of the park in 1987. It was renamed Lake Compounce Festival Park by the new owner, Joseph Ballesteri. A 20,000-seat amphitheater was added in 1988. In a strange twist, one of the first groups to perform there was Milli Vanilli, and during their performance, the secret got out they were lip-syncing when the recording they were supposedly singing to started to skip. The owners concentrated on concert promotion, and the amusement park portion fell into disuse. The roller coaster and other rides were not operating by 1991. The park would change hands several times, with the park being upgraded along the way. Present-day families can go to enjoy water slides, the amusement rides, and compounds. It's inevitable that Lake Compounce would develop its own ghost stories. Since the early 1870s, the Compounce Spiritualist Association would hold their annual conventions at Lake Compounce. Could they be the source of ghostly sightings throughout the years? But there could be others. In 1939, Edward Bowen, 65, who operated the roller coaster for 23 years, was found dead in his car. He was slumped in the driver's seat. The ME determined he died from a heart attack. He lived alone in a cottage behind the pavilion at the lake and was a caretaker during the winter months. He built the first roller coaster at the lake in 1916 and helped design the second one in 1917. In 1940, James Vigone, 19, drowned when he had gone for an outing with 350 other trade school students. He, along with a schoolmate, had gone out on the lake in a rowboat. The boat submerged, and after waves from a park speedboat swamped it, they were forced to swim for the shore, which was 40 or 50 feet away, but neither made it. The other boy was picked up by a speedboat. Vignon went under before the rescue boat could reach him. In 1956, a brawl started in the park. Daryl Hotham, 20, was killed when he was shot through the heart by a 16-year-old. Apparently, they each belonged to opposing gangs and had gone to the woods to continue fighting after what had just started as name-calling. They also wanted to avoid the police who were monitoring the large crowds in the park. Hotham beat the 16-year-old, and later was found that Hotham killed him after he dared Ronald A. Randall to shoot him. Randall was still criminally charged. Hotham left behind a wife, Marjorie, who he had married 2 years before. In 1963, a man was killed when he fell from the roller coaster. His name was Robert Evon, 27, and for some reason he stood up in the roller coaster. They warned him to sit down through the loudspeaker. He did so, but stood up again, where he tumbled down 39 feet. In 1981, Michelle Johnson, 16, was killed when she fell from the Wildcat roller coaster. She was standing and attempting to touch the fence posts along the tracks. When her hand became caught in a post, she was pulled out and run over by the roller coaster. Matthew Hand, 16, a ride attendant, died in August of 1999 after he fell beneath the spinning tornado ride. Devin Alexander, 6, died in July of 2000 after falling off his inner tube on the lake plunge ride and slipping underwater for more than 20 minutes. In 2001, a groundskeeper, Wilfredo Martinez, 23, who was trimming weeds under a low stretch of the Boulder Dash coaster, didn't hear when the train was sent out on a test run. He was struck and killed. His death was the third at the park for the prior 22 months. These are stories of those who witnessed the unexplained at Lake Compounce. Quote, I've been working for the past 4 years at Lake Compounce, an amusement park in Bristol, Connecticut. This park is widely regarded as the oldest amusement park in the United States. I have worked numerous third shifts in the off season, where I am the only living soul in the park until about 8 a.m. And boy, have I experienced some things. There have been multiple deaths at the park, both employees and guests, two of which I was present at as a first responder in the park. Many guards, including myself, refused to patrol specific areas of the park, more specifically the famous Starlight Theater, where many famous musicians had their careers start. Frank Sinatra is one of them. One night, while patrolling the park in January at around 3 a.m., I was walking past the ballroom theater, and the lights were off and the doors locked. As I turned the corner to go to the other side of the park, I looked back and all the lights were on, and the side door was open. Nobody is in the park besides me. I immediately went back to our building and remained there for the rest of my shift. Another night, I went into our administration building to use the bathroom. As I was finishing up, I heard footsteps and doors opening and closing. Once again, I immediately went back into our security building and stayed there all night until my relief came. That morning, the first shift guard saw the look on my face and knew right away that I had experienced something. He only nodded and said, I know this place scares me too. More recently in July, we have a new laser light show. My partner and I were watching the lights when we get a call over the radio for a suspicious person. We go to check it out, and it's a 15 or 16-year-old boy well away from the crowd at the beach watching the show. We asked him what was wrong, and he said, Wow, a lot of people have died here. I can see them, the ones that drowned, and the one on the mountain. He's in gray staring down. We've had multiple drownings, and the gray figure he saw on the mountain we suspect was a maintenance worker who wore gray jumpsuits. That was killed by our mountain roller coaster. Sorry. Wait a minute, here we go. That was killed by our mountain roller coaster Boulder Dash a few years back. And then the kid said this, It's time again, it will happen soon. We all agree at the lake that every 2 years something bad happens, a death, severe injury, etc., and we are long overdue. I work security at the oldest amusement. This is another story. I work security at the oldest amusement park in America, Lake Compounce. The ballroom is by far the most haunted. A couple of my supervisors, in the middle of the day, decided to take a break in the ballroom. One of them had eaten a granola bar and was going to throw the wrapper away in the garbage can when the can slid across the room and a chair was knocked over. At night, you hear music playing and people talking. It was definitely scary to be there alone. Yes, can you imagine being a security guard there? I'd never heard of this place as being the oldest, and I believe the original wooden roller coaster is there. I don't know. I just don't know about getting on a wooden roller coaster that's been built for over 100 years, but that's just me. All right, I will be back soon with some more interesting eerie news. Until next time, take care.